Great. Welcome again, everyone. This is our fourth session of the Breath of Life 2021 Symposium. We're offering this series of online presentations in place of our biennial Breath of Life Institute since we were unable to hold it in person this year. And we'll have two presentations each month through the end of November on topics related to language revitalization offered by Native individuals and organizations that do the work to revitalize and sustain their languages. Whether you have attended Breath of Life before, prior to joining us or not, we hope you will learn something that you can share with your community's language revitalization efforts as well. Today, I'm your host. My name is Carly Tex. I'm the ICL's Executive Director. And joining me as our co-host and tech is Carmen Moreno, Program Assistant. The session is being recorded, so when we get to the question and answer session, if you don't wish to have yourself recorded, just state that before asking and we'll pause the recording. Down on the lower part of your screen, you should see a chat icon or 3 dots for more. If you select on that, then you can select chat and enter. We'd like to have you enter into the chat a greeting in your language and a brief introduction so we can get to know the folks on the call. In today's session, we have Dr. James Sarmento, who is Shasta and also received his doctorate in Native American Studies from UC Davis. He currently works at the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians as Executive Director of Cultural Resources and was Executive Director of the Native American Language Center at UC Davis. From 2008 to 2013, was Project Coordinator for the J.P. Harrington Database Project at UC Davis, where he assisted academic and Indigenous scholars in accessing Harrington's ethnographic and linguistic notes. I'm sure many folks that have attended Breath of Life previously are familiar with J.P. Harrington. And he also worked for the Yochadihi Wintun Nation as their cultural resource manager, where he managed the site preservation unit from 2013 to 2017. And he later worked with the Buena Vista Rancheria of Miwok as their tribal historic preservation officer. His research focuses on California Indian language reclamation, specifically with the Shasta language, as well as California archaeology and archaeological field methods as they pertain to cultural resource management within California and the digital archiving of linguistic and cultural data. Personally, I've known James ever since I got started with linguistics many years ago, and we both worked, well, I was kind of mentored by, but we both worked with Shirley Silver, and that was kind of our common friend. And I remember having emails with Shirley where she was talking about this wonderful student that she's working with, James Sarmento, and she thought he was just the best. So when we were planning who to invite to the symposium, someone said, hey, you know, James just received his PhD. So we thought, yes, we need to invite him and let him talk about whatever he feels like. Let's learn a little bit more about James. So James, by inviting you here, we hope that our audience can learn from your experience and learn more about the Shasta language. And today's talk is the Shasta language, a 100-year language conversation. And I'm sure James will talk about the title and what that means, as well as other interesting facts about his work and about the Shasta language. So James, when you're ready, take it away.
All right, thank you. Kasiyami Maichika Tuta Yapu Kaskekwa James. Hi, how are you all doing? My name is James Sarmento. I wanted to at least say hello and ask how you are all doing in Shasta. Very much at the beginning of my journey, so part of the talk will be about that. I really wanted to start off with just sort of centering where I'm at. I live in Woodland, California, so I acknowledge that where I am physically sitting is Patwin traditional Aboriginal area, and which currently it's 3 tribes that are associate that are associated with that particular area right now. So Yocho de Hiwintuan Nation, Cortina Renteria, and Calusa. And I'm going to beg forgiveness that I often forget their traditional names, because I know that they changed them, and I feel awful for blanking on that right now. So I'm going to put up a PowerPoint, so give me a second. I am awful with technology. I'm always learning, so let's put a PowerPoint up. All right, can everybody see that? Can I get a little bit of nod, just that looks okay? All right, a couple nods, looks all right. All right. So, there we go. Let's get this thing going. So, working with Roland B. Dixon. So this presentation is a lot about my personal journey with Shasta, but also talking a lot about the language. So in the early 1900s, Roland B. Dixon collected ethnographic and linguistic field notes for several articles about the Shasta. He did this in consultation with Ikyahumpik, which is his English name is Sergeant Sambo. So he is one of the most prominent figures in Shasta linguistics. So if you're looking for any articles on Shasta, it's going to reference him in some fashion. While conducting field work and field research in 1958, Shirley Silver also worked with Sergeant Sambo. Roland B. Dixon worked with Sergeant Sambo. So it was this really interesting. It was really an interesting kind of juxtaposition. So one of those texts that Ikyahumpik, and I'm actually going to switch over to his indigenous name, and I apologize that I use both interchangeably. Part of that is a convention of ease. Some of it is just it's not in the literature as Ikyahumpik, although that hopefully will change as time goes forward. So one of the texts that came out of Shirley Silver's work was a remembrance of what it was like to work with Roland B. Dixon. So essentially, Shirley Silver had asked the question of Ikyahumpik, so what's it like working with Roland B. Dixon in the past? Because you had you had interacted with him. And essentially, Ikyahumpik gives an indigenous perspective on the linguistic fieldwork of the time at the turn of the century. So this would have been in the early 1900s. Currently, so a lot of my dissertation ends up working with the materials that Shirley had produced in the 1950s, but also we had met in 2008 and started this wonderful relationship, which I'll talk about in a second. And this, again, sort of led to this interesting intersection of and this development of this idea of this language conversation. Essentially, there's this past remembrance from that's happening between both Dixon and Ikyahumpik, as well as with Shirley Silver and Ikyahumpik, and sort of this interesting position that the future is sort of placed in between myself and Shirley, as also engaging with a lot of the materials that had been produced by both her and Ikyahumpik, as well as Dixon and his materials. So it really becomes this language conversation that is happening through time. Part of that is, Goffman in 1981 had this really proposed this idea about conversation. Really it takes like a small number of individuals, often framed as sort of this idea of the speaker and hearer or slash listener position. And then the conversation often moves back and forth between somebody who's talking and somebody who's listening, and it continues to do that. It's interesting to think of this if in terms of an indigenous perspective, in terms of being able to communicate and talk with people in the past, as well as people in the deep past, as well as the current. So in terms of elongating that sort of indigenous language conversation that's happening, the speaker, who is Ikia Humpik, has this intermediary that is the collector, which becomes Dixon, as well as Shirley Silver as well. And then the hearers become the individual that are currently working with the language material, currently working to revitalize and reclaim the language. So it allows for speakers to connect with tribal members across time. I've really I really felt like that was happening a lot with myself in terms of dealing with the language material, but also with listening to hours and hours of audio tapes, but listening also to Shirley Silver, who's this intermediary when I was working with her. Just actually stop here for a second, because I really want to talk about how I ran in, because Carly, you brought it up, and I really feel like I need to explain how I met Shirley Silver, because it's a totally fun story. And I apologize ahead of time that I'm going to swear. I know you're going to catch this one. So in 2000, I think it was like 2006 or 7, I had a friend who was teaching courses at American River College, and she let me know that there were some courses at UC Davis that you can go and take with Professor Martha Macri, and there's NAS 107 and NAS 108. And in these classes, you can learn a little bit about language revitalization and reclamation. And I was, at the time, like, I really wanted to learn my language, the Shasta language, and just super interested in it. And prior to that, I had seen Shirley Silver's dissertation. And so just a heads up, community college system is fantastic, often does not have very good linguistic programs. So like looking at Shirley Silver's dissertation, this is like rocket science, building schematics. This was just something totally crazy and foreign to me. So I'm like, I think I looked at it and I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's certainly a thing. I'm going to shelve it, because I think I was working on an assignment for a class, and I wrote the 5-page paper that I had to write, and just kind of like put that in the background. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not ready for this. I don't understand anything that's going on. I'm just going to put it away, and maybe I'll come back to it later. So that was, 2008 sort of was the right time, right place. I ended up hearing about Martha Macri and the NAS 107 and 108 courses. And I'm like, all right, this sounds kind of interesting. I'll go and talk with Professor Martha Macri. So in talking with her, we have this like fantastic, like life-changing conversation. We're sitting, I go to her office. Ironically, it was the second time I had been there, because I was supposed to meet with her one day and she stood me up, but don't tell her that. But I think that's out there in the world now. She knows about it. But so I come back the second day and I'm like, okay, all right. I'm prepared either way. Hopefully this will be a fantastic conversation. I'm just like just excited. I'm about ready to burst. And so we sit down, and she's like telling me like about NAS 107 and 108. And I'm like, yeah, I want to learn more about the language. She talks with me a little bit about Breath of Life and the Master Apprentice. I'm like, yeah, I'm in. Tell me more. And I'm just eating it. Just that it's just like, yes, tell me more. And it was a fantastic conversation. At the very end of the conversation, she says, well, I'm teaching a, a graduate class. If you're not teaching the 107, 108 right now, but if you would like, you can join that class and you can kind of sit in it. We can work on a project. And it was one of those things where it felt very much like, well, and if you do well in the class, Shirley Silver was my professor. I'm like, Shirley Silver, who produced, you know, this dissertation here. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's good. Like, yeah, that would be so cool. I would love to meet her. And it was just fantastic. And she says, okay, I would love to do that. We'll sign you up for the class. It'll be really cool. But young man, before you leave, I have a question for you. Do you happen to know any Shasta words? And I think it sank a little bit because I'm like, yes, I know only a couple. And she said, oh, okay, that's all right. There's nothing wrong. What are they? Quatak and Quatakopsy. Coyote and coyote shit. So, this gets me referred to as a coyote shit guy, which I'm totally, I think I totally own now. So it's just, yeah, so she gets a good laugh out of it. I think I had a good laugh out of it too. And like, we're off to the races. So we're having this fantastic, I go to the class, I learn all about it. One of the projects I ended up doing for that class specifically was just just creating a spreadsheet of all the words that were in Shirley Silver's dissertation. So I just pulled all the words out to kind of create the idea that was to create like a word list, maybe a dictionary later on down the road. So it was like just this fantastic. I'm like, okay, cool. I've did all this work after a semester. Do I get to meet Shirley? And it's like, yeah. We're gonna go out there. So she drives me all the way out to her house. And it was this fantastic, again, that sort of feeling of like, yeah, I'm gonna meet somebody who can help me on my language journey. I at the time didn't know her well at all. I mean, I'd only known her through her writings, so which are not robust, but certainly that's the only way I knew her. So I'm like, oh, I'm just excited to meet her. And what is we get to her house, and I remember, like, this is the part that I remember, like, there's Freya Shipley, who is Bill Shipley's daughter, is there with Shirley, and Martha's there. So we have these, which I actually, like, looking back on that, feel like that was a very like a very like, I really like that we had these intermediaries there to like kind of introduce us and get us basically start the conversation. So it was like this fantastic, it felt very traditional in a lot of ways, but not so much. So we were basically meeting for the first time, and it was exciting, cool to meet like Bill Shipley's daughter. Like, for me, it was like, oh wow, this is like, I'm starting to meet all these like really cool people and wonderful people. And so we have this like fantastic conversation. We're all at the table. Shirley's just like, I don't know how else to describe her outside of like, I'm having just like just great. I'm just having a good time. We're just talking about things and going over it, and all the difficulties in language learning and all these other pieces. So we get to like, I don't even know what time it was. It was dark, but it was time for us to go home. And at the very end of the conversation, there was this Okay, so I heard from Martha that you know some Shasta words. What are they? And I'm like, okay. It's Kwatak. She's like, Coyote. And Kwatakupsi. She stops. And I can see that she's just like running. And she goes, no, that is not right. I'm like, okay. Yeah, it needs to be, you need to add a possessive. So Kwatakatu upsi. So you need to add that because that shit needs to belong to somebody. And it better belong to Coyote. So I'm like, oh God. I'm like, it's sort of like the funniest thing. So that's like our first introduction to Shirley is this, like, now I'm messing up on the language in front of a linguist, and it just like, yeah, it's like I get schooled almost immediately, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna like this. This is good stuff. So uh, after that, at that point, me and her worked on language almost every other week. I drove out from UC Davis to Sebastopol to her house and basically talked with her about language, and then also uh, she would feed me bagels and strawberries. She would also watch Rachel Maddow with me. So that ends up becoming like a big deal for whatever reason. We both enjoyed Rachel Maddow, and then also that I'd also feed her dinner because don't I feel awful like telling on her, but she, like, some of her cooking was questionable, and I loved her very much, so it felt like she needed to have something good, even if it wasn't cooked by me. It was like some kind of other thing. So I really wanted to like tell that story because I just think it's I love her dearly, and I just like speaking about that. So in terms, so I really wanted to also because I didn't bring this up a little while ago, and I took a long time sort of talking about that story. I really need to put the place to where I'm from. So what we're talking about here. So again, this is Shasta territory. This is out of Shirley Silver's. She did the Shasta Peoples, but it also shows up in Victor Gola's work and other spaces. So historically there were several political linguistic divisions within the Shasta Nation. At the time, Shirley in 1978 identified 4 major groupings. This would be the Shasta in Northern California and Southern Oregon, the New River Shasta, Kanamihu, Okonachu, and essentially the northern extents of the Shasta territory, reference sort of the Rogue River, where sort of modern day Jacksonville, Oregon is kind of near New River, going down south. So generally, this is where Shasta lands laid. And again, I would point that there's no like formal boundaries. I like in here like, even I wish I could like point, and I think I can do that with the mouse here. Hey, there we go. We're learning today. So right here, I know that in terms of like along the sort of this borderline in here, there's also Kamatwa language as well that's between the areas as well, which I sort of, I think, get viewed as kind of like a language between sort of Karuk and Shasta there. So just wanted to kind of take a second and really point out the place. So really, when I'm talking about Shasta, I'm always thinking Northern California, Southern Oregon, the Southern Oregon spaces. So I was talking earlier about that that anthropological, that question that Shirley had asked about working with Roland B. Dixon. So that's what a lot of these lines are from. They're directly from that particular text where she asked, she asked Sargent, tell me a little bit about working with Roland Dixon, and basically just started rattling off of Ikyahampik started talking about that. So, so really in the beginning, Dixon and Silver, and to some extent myself, we're looking for speakers or teachers, basically basically looking for somebody to tell us about the language, but also to teach us something about the language, really looking for that individual. So later on, those relationships kind of flip in terms of becoming language, in terms of collectors becoming intermediaries that are actually connecting sort of Ikyahampik with myself, but also with other community members as well. So really to place Ikyahampik, I wanted to, place him where he is from. Sargent was one of the last speakers, last fluent speakers, not the last speaker, but one of the last speakers. He spoke several dialects of Shasta languages, and one, again, was most often consulted by linguists. So on his father's side of the family, his grandfather was Rogue River Shasta, and his grandmother was Shasta Valley Shasta. And then on his mother's side, his grandmother was Kamatwa, and his grandfather was Karuk. It's actually really interesting in terms of like his family dynamic. So his father actually had two wives at the turn of the century. And his second wife would have would have been responsible for speaking with him and teaching him language as well. So this was she was Shasta Valley. So in terms of like looking at his household specifically, he's like really like this wealth of knowledge in terms of Shasta language. Like just like his household is just made up of everybody in the area. That's and I know like with his father was also responsible largely for the ghost dance moving from Southern Oregon into California. So it's in the Northern California area. So they get credit for that from I believe it's Dubois. So it's really like in terms of like persons and families, he's like a really interesting individual who doesn't get talked about a lot. So I love talking about him because it needs to be talked about more. I love this particular photo of him. Part of this is just outside of Hornbrook. So I like talking about connections with people. So the photo, again, just outside of Hornbrook. My mother grew up in Hornbrook. And then also the interesting thing is, so the photo was taken by Cecilia Jacobs, local resident up there. And my grandmother was her housekeeper. So it was this like really kind of like strange, like, okay, kind of like we knew him locally, but also like this photo ends up being like this weird like connection point as well, because this came directly from Shirley Silver. So she had this. So talking a little bit about Roland B. Dixon, which there's quite a bit to talk about with him, but I actually don't like overly focusing in on him as much as I like to speak about the Shasta language individuals, specifically Ikyahampik. So, in the turn of the century, so 1900, 1902, 1903, and 1904, Dixon went up north and was collecting ethnographic and linguistic information for several articles about the Shasta. This becomes like his big article, The Shasta, becomes the most prominent one out of his work, and gets published by the Bulletin of American Museum of Natural History. So again, this work focused on collection of ethnographic, subsequent articles on the language materials end up focusing, and subsequent articles on linguistic materials largely come out of J.P. Harrington, Catherine Holt, and Shirley Silvers and others, really in terms of documenting the language. I think, Kroeber and Dixon had essentially had a deal where essentially the northeastern portion of California and would be taken up by Dixon, and the other half would be all Kroeber working on that. So it's like this really interesting, like he, in terms of like the amount of area that he's supposed to be covering and the amount of materials he produces, he's not, there's not a lot. I don't feel like there's a lot there, but there's stuff there for sure. Which is interesting because when you go like back into the past, surely, again, going back to that, working with Roland B. Dixon, that's one of the big things that is noted by Ikeahumpick. He's like, this guy's like running around. He had all these papers in his hands and he was doing stuff. So in that particular story or particular narrative, lines 17, 16, but lines 16 through 30 describe how Dixon is like utilizing slip files with, Dixon or Ikeahumpick's describing like how he's like writing words on paper and, proceeds to ask like, Ikeahumpick questions. And he's saying, oh, he's asking me questions like, well, how do you say tree? Or how do you know any old stories, and all these other questions. So it's like this really interesting conversation. Like when he's asking those things, it's he's trying to get at all these other pieces that all become part of his published work, again, sort of in the Shasta, that material. But even like Ikeahumpick has knowledge that this is going to be something. He's going to turn that into something else, and after like a certain, after a year had passed from Dixon's visit in I think it was 1907, Dixon comes back and basically tells Ikeahumpick that, he needs to find some, he needs to, basically, he knew that at the time that some of the other linguists from like down south at Berkeley and other places are looking for Indians. They're looking for people up north to basically do language work. So even, in the moment, Ikeahumpick is saying like, or he's recounting that Dixon said, hey, there's going to be all these people from down south coming all the way up north to basically talk with you and talk with other communities. And this is really interesting in terms of like just sort of a narrative where he's talking about like, well, this is somebody, like this is a community member saying, hey, there's going to be a bunch of guys coming up here, they're all going to be asking you questions about language, and this is all going to happen, this is all happening at the very beginning of the century. Again, sort of coming back a little bit more present in terms of talking about Shirley's work. Her dissertation on the Shasta language, again, was submitted for completion for a PhD in linguistics at Berkeley in 1966. She worked with a survey of California and other Indian languages between the summers of 1957 and 61. and which helped her support a lot of her early field work. Later on, she would do like a total of 7 weeks during the summers of 1960, 1961, which would be supported by the Bollingen Foundation grant. I note this one largely because when I first gave a presentation on this, Shirley was still with us, and she made a really big deal about me mentioning every single time that the Bollingen grant found that funded her research. So it was she wanted to make sure that every time I gave this presentation that I have to say, and so her wish was that every time that we talk about it, I have to say the funding mechanism was Bollingen Foundation grant for 7 weeks in the summer of 1960 and 1961. She's really specific with her things. I love her dearly. Carly's like, yeah, she gets it. It's just the way she was. She wanted me to do it. I'm like, you bet, I'll do that. So in total, she spent about 8 months gathering data. And again, this included all of the field work that she did with her research up north, but also a lot of the research that others had done. So this would have been Jaime D'Angelo and L.S. Freeland in the summers of 1927 and 28, which largely is reworkings of Dixon's material previously. So, again, while conducting her field research in 58, Shirley Silver ended up working, she worked with Ikia Humpek and collected texts on numerous subjects. So in total, in total for her work, her collection is of approximately 20 Shasta texts that were collected by both Ikia Humpek and Clara Wicks before their passing. And these are 20 plus texts that are on top of the 80 some odd text that she re-recorded from Dixon and re-recorded from D'Angelo and Freeland. So it's just a massive amount of potential material that she had. So in terms of hey, this is going to kind of work. So Silver in a lot of ways worked very similar to Dixon in the past. She would have asked, she would have asked questions, would have asked Ikia Humpek about like what he wanted to talk about that particular day, would have, in terms of looking at her material, she was going off of whatever list, but often, Ikia Humpek had his own idea for what he wanted to talk about that particular day. So this would become, if he wanted to talk about baskets, he would, guess what? That's what they talked about. They talked about baskets. If he wanted to tell a story, guess what? That's what they talked about. They talked about stories. So very different from in that respect from the conversations that were happening with Dixon, which are very sort of formulaic or very word list oriented and stories, but certainly the same in that respect, but not the same because Ikia Humpek's driving the bus, and so to speak, on that. So I'm kind of looking at the time, and I want to make sure that we leave time for questions. So I'm going to kind of speed through some of these lines. Oh, hey, I'm almost there, so I don't have to speed through nothing. There you go.
You're doing good, James. We're
right.
going to collect some questions in the chat for you.
Oh, all right, perfect. So this is really the last line of the text that comes from working with Roland B. Dixon. That, essentially the last thing that Dixon ever says to Ikia Humpek is, I don't want to learn I don't want to learn from other individuals. You know, I basically just want to talk with you about language. I don't want to hear anything else but your language from you. And you know, it's kind of the idea is that he'll be back to basically talk more about it, and Dixon never returns, never has another conversation with Sargent, and largely there's nobody returning until Shirley Silver is doing her work in the 50s. So there becomes this 50-year gap, you know, in terms of what's happening with Roland B. Dixon, with Ikia Hampik and Shirley. So Shirley's having the same kind of information that's going, gathering the same information at the 50 years later. So it becomes like this really fantastic double check on a lot of the work that was done previously with more modern in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s. And then, you know, bringing the story kind of forward with the work that I'm doing and working with the community now. You're really seeing that that conversation is really kind of moved from just being this, has moved sort of out of the realm of linguist or from linguist and back into the community. So now we're having this language conversation is not just this conversation between linguists and only with linguists having debates about syntax or other kinds of things. This is the language. This is the community working on the language and speaking with the community in the distant past about it. So I really value the time that I had with Shirley Silver, but also want to like when she passed in 2015, the goal with her materials was try to bring that back to the community. And part of that was done with the dissertation. Every single text that we worked on is in the dissertation. No matter what they were in varying states, but most of them we were able to get in there at a decent spot. So the hope is that a lot more of that material that she has, which she has, her collection is still has future work to be done with it. I'm hoping to see that being returned back to the community so that future conversations can have with that. And with that, I hope I didn't bore anybody too much. I really appreciate the time in talking about language stuff, my personal journey, and always love talking about Shirley and language work. So Cosme Poke, that's it. Thank you. There's my email. There's a bunch of sources too, but I'm not worried about those so much.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Let's give James a round of applause or a round of emojis if you can do your reactions. And we'll get to our or drop into the chat some thank yous. Let's so we do have some questions for you. It looks like we have a question about, trying to start from the beginning. We have a question from Bruce, and so I'm going to ask Bruce if he can unmute himself, and Bruce, when you're ready, jump right in.
Okay, James, terrific to hear from you. I have had some email exchange with you in the kind of now feels like remote past. Can you hear me clearly where I am? That's my first question.
I can. It sounds like a little windy, but we can hear you good.
Okay, I'm outside the library in Falmouth and on their wireless and didn't know how well it was working. So as you may know, I work with Achamawi next door, Pitt River, and I know that Shirley did a great deal of work, especially upriver and Achamawi, And I've wondered for a good many years what became of her material. I lost touch with her. And then after she passed in 2015, of course, I had no idea. And I have almost all the archival material that's out there on Achamawi in the database, and really would like to be able to incorporate her material if that's at all possible, especially because she did so much work upriver and there are dialect differences that are really important to understand. So that's one thing. And the other thing is a lot of people are interested in Dixon's stuff for comparative stuff and so-called Palainan. And just to put out there that you can't do comparative work with these languages until you've done the morphological analysis. You can't do whole words. You've got to understand what the morphemes are and get the morpheme to morpheme comparisons, or else you're just out flying around with the seagulls or the hawks or whatever. So that's my question anyway. Do you have any leads on that? Do you know what became of her Achamawi material?
Yeah, no. So I have. Hopefully, I can answer your question. Is and I know that we had an email correspondence, and then I feel like, so in the meantime, I ended up switching jobs, and then we now have a almost 12-month-old baby in the background that you can't hear. So I've been I'm going to say really bad at like communicating as of late and trying to finish up my dissertation. But so when she passed, her material had the material needed to move right away. So I have a lot of the material in my possession. And the goal was after I was done with my dissertation, I was going to be focusing on getting that to getting that to a repository. So I would definitely like to talk with you maybe at some other point. So I'm gonna throw my email. I'm gonna throw my email in the chat, and we can reconnect. But the material is I'm working on processing and doing some of the stuff for Shasta, but there's other material that exists that is outside of Shasta that needs to get repatriated, liberated. I don't know what the right word is, or but I definitely want to see it get to the right community members, the right whoever. So
okay, well, the Pitt River folks are happy with Achamawi materials being in the California Language Archive, and my own notes are the originals are going to the American Philosophical Society. So there are two archives, and you probably know the archivist's motto of LOCK, lots of copies keep stuff safe.
Yeah.
So having it in two places is a good thing. So hold that in mind. And congratulations on both counts: the dissertation, the baby, the marriage. Wonderful. Congratulations. I will now mute, and we will be in touch. Thank you.
Absolutely. I threw my email in the chat. So please, if anybody has any questions outside of this, I'm happy to talk.
We have a question from William. Can you tell us something about the relationship of Dixon with Franz Boas or Edward Sapir?
Probably not. to be entirely honest. I mean, in terms of, I think the relationship that and yeah, I don't know that I would be very helpful in that in that respect, because my focus largely was from the indigenous speakers. So in terms of who they were working with, as opposed to exhaustive stuff on the anthropologist. There's lots of materials out there about Dixon, Krober, and Franz Boas, not so much on Ikia Humpik and other indigenous scholars that were not given. So it's my way of dodging the question, but so I apologize for not having an answer to that, but I wasn't focused on those guys.
All right, thank you.
No offense either.
This is an interesting question. Is there a language revitalization movement in Siskiyou County? Shasta language revitalization.
Working on it, and I think is the best way to describe it. I know that I've been talking a lot with and working a lot with the Shasta Indian Nation community, and doing language revitalization and language work with them. I think I'll speak to prior to the pandemic. The idea was that, or at least my hope was that, finishing up my own personal work and then being able to do language classes and other kinds of things was very much where we wanted to do what we wanted to do 2 years ago. And then the pandemic hit, and I think it changed how everybody does things. So I think that we're trying to figure out, like, at least in my mind, I think what's we're trying to figure out like a podcast of some nature, or Zoom courses, or other kinds of things. Part of this is just the difficulty for non-recognized community members to be able to access language data, and where to host things, all of those pieces. So I think the short answer is kind of yes, that it's going to happen. No, it's not moving as quick as like anybody I think would like. And I didn't see who that question was from, but happy to talk more or speak more to that as much as I can.
I think the question came from Julian.
Hey,
Yeah.
so like, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I would be happy to let you know if things proceed. I'm looking right now for options for hosting it online and figuring out what that looks like. I don't know if that answers your question.
I'm going to be heading, doing some work with the folks at Wairika. There's a we do language work up there, but there's my Shasta relations are there, and they're political as hell, but are they language? Are they motivated by language? And it seems like that's the missing thing that I'm seeing there, especially amongst all the Shasta folks. That once you get into the language, it kind of like really firms up your sensibility or your drive or something.
Yeah.
So maybe that might be. I can look around and start those kind of conversations myself. That kind of emphasizing that.
Personally, I love talking about language and doing language in anytime, anywhere. It's just again, I'm gonna blame the 12-month-old kid for right now. When he gets older, then I can't blame him anymore. But just for right now, figuring out sleep patterns to be able to get that right.
I think in your previous response, you kind of answered this next question. Someone asked if we have a guest who asked if we will eventually be able to see or hear a podcast on Shasta language. And you kind of touched upon it a little bit. Can you expand upon that a little more?
I think I know I talked with somebody the other day about it, and I think I'm trying to figure out where like that would be housed. So if you do like a podcast, those like something that runs through like Apple or Spotify or some of those other things, you have to host the podcast somewhere. So it has to exist on some kind of platform. And that's the part that needs figuring out, is like where that would be hosted and where that would live. So that's and then sort of the other logistical pieces of outside of that, which is like, well, how much is that going to cost, and what that ends up looking like. So I hope that answers. So I want to do it, and I want it to happen sooner, but it never happens as soon as anybody wants it.
Seems like there could be a common institutionally supported host for a lot of different tribes.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely something to consider. Good idea. Okay, so we have a question from Kayla. She wants to know, does Shasta language have different past tense suffixes?
Yes. Short answer.
Short
Yes.
answer,
Okay,
yes.
that's it.
Bruce got my brain going because studying Kaduk, like there's At, there's Ahain, there's Anik, and Anik is like the ancient past tense. And I always thought that was really cool to see people or hear people use it. And I don't know anything about Shasta, so curious if there's anything like that.
Yes, and I'm not going to be able to recall the endings.
Okay.
So, I know that there's like in terms of conceptually, there's sort of the recent past, which like often I think of at least as like my lifetime. So it's something that I would have been privy to. There's sort of like the middle past. I don't know what else to call it besides that. It's like I have knowledge of this thing that happened not in my lifetime, but maybe in my like my father's lifetime or somebody else's, like that. And then sort of the very deep past where it's like you have knowledge of it, but you don't really like it's kind of with like traditional narratives, I think, are like kind of more in that space where it's like this is Coyote doing something or somebody in the very, very deep past doing something.
Way cool.
I'm I totally follow you on Twitter, so we should just like bother each other at some point about this on at some point, because I've been thinking like I think I saw something that you posted. I'm like, oh yeah, I should totally just like start like posting these like weird Shasta language stuff that doesn't quite like make any sense to anybody with the exception of like 2 people in the world.
But they're so happy when that happens. You see you post, right?
Right? No, I'm so happy. I like I affectionately call it chastising.
Chastising.
Yeah, so you can chastise an individual, and you can put things out there, put language stuff out there. So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I should copyright it really quickly before we get off of this.
We have a question from Norma. Any observations on specialized words for family members, such as mother's daughter versus father's daughter, etc.?
So mother's daughter, yes, I mean, there's lots of sort of family terms. I don't know how to, like, in terms of, I mean, the language has all of those, and there's sort of different ways in terms of referring to individuals in terms of referential or right, how you know an individual, as well as like how that person how that person sort of interacts with you, I think is sort of the kind of like how we're thinking about it. I see you have a follow-up. I asked because it seems important to keep family members from intermarrying. That's probably true as well. I think it just good to kind of know who the person is and how they're related to you generally. And then you also don't want to have like your mother's sister, or you want to make sure that your family tree doesn't become a family stick, as it were.
Well, that's the first I've heard of
I
that
see
one.
I see some of you laughing, and I'm like, yeah, no, I have some family that does that on my side too.
I'm stealing that.
Yeah. We have
Yeah.
some good sayings that came out of this presentation today.
I am so sorry.
Shirts.
There's gonna be all these
Yeah.
awful names out there.
You could make t-shirts.
I'll take it. Sure. As long as it goes towards a good cause like language revitalization, and I'm good.
That's great. I think that's it for the chat questions. Is there anyone else that wants to ask a question out loud? Okay, I'm looking. I'm not seeing anything. I have
just-
oh, go ahead.
I just want to say, James, you have a sort of spiritual presence over your head flapping its wings. I don't know if you're aware of that.
I am. So that's my, obviously it's a fan. The other part is like if I keep light on, it looks like I've got like this halo effect, and that's
I'm sorry to digress, Carla. You had a serious
It's okay.
point to make.
No, it's all right.
no, I will address the like, yeah, the fan halo that I have behind me. I don't turn on the light behind me when I do presentations because that blurs out and it looks like I have an actual halo. I will also address the numerous Star Wars stuff behind me. I am that nerd.
I thought it was one of those beanie caps with the spinning thing on top of
I
it.
keep it on the back of it.
The propeller
I
head.
guess if I
Spinning
do it like
yarn
that,
bullcrap.
it kind of looks like it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
I have a one. I guess this could be the last thing that we close on, but we typically ask people what are some challenges that you face in your work and how do you work around that. So you can address that, but I'm also interested in, that you recently received your PhD from UC Davis, and I'm wondering if there are any Indigenous scholars out there listening who might be interested in a PhD eventually. Do you have any words of wisdom for them and how to prepare, how to get through it, for anyone who might be interested eventually, or a degree in linguistics, and studying their language in the similar way that you did?
Geez.
Mhm.
Thanks a lot for the hard one. I mean, I guess I would say to anybody who's looking to do a PhD program, regardless of what it is, you're totally worthy of being in like that field and doing it. I think I know that there's like lots of things that go into like starting a PhD program. Everybody feels like they're an imposter, that they shouldn't be there, and that they got in like by some like cheat in the system. You did not cheat the system. You were fantastic. You're wonderful. You're brilliant. And that's why the faculty and other people are rooting for you the entire time. So I think that that's really, I would tell, I really get out of your own head and please like allow yourself to be like, and I'm gonna swear and I apologize for swearing, you can cut this out, like be fucking awesome, just do it. Like I just want people to be awesome. I think in terms of challenges for stuff going, like I think that there's always like financial challenges and time. There's never enough time to be. I think that it's probably I'm not going to speak for everybody who does language work, but maybe I'll speak this one time on it, is that I always feel like I never have enough time to do it. And then I always feel like I'm pulled in 17 different directions. And I think that there's, I think we always need to take, you need to have space for yourself to allow yourself to be like, you are also fucking awesome. And you should remind yourself of that every so often and kind of say like, hey, look, I know I'm being pulled in 17 directions. It's okay to just, way more than you're ever going to get out into the world. And I think that like we're all take time for yourself on that. I don't, maybe that's my feeling for today, is that I always feel like I'm never good enough, or I'm never getting to that. And you know what? I am pretty awesome. You are all pretty awesome. Everybody's awesome. And I've never met anybody or worked with anybody who I didn't like, love, or want to be around. So it was, maybe take away that good feeling. Hey.
Definitely, that's definitely a great takeaway. I just wanted to open it up to allow one more person to make a quick comment before we close. Justin. Oops, sorry, I accidentally muted you. Go ahead. Sorry, Justin.
Sorry, I'm just deferring to others.
I didn't quite hear it. Anyways, Justin's awesome too. He
Okay, sorry, I was just saying that I will defer to someone else who has a question or comment. I was just going to plug the Native American Studies program at UC Davis as a potential place to do language-related research.
Thank you for that, Justin.
I can plug it too. Here,
Okay.
I'll do you one better, Justin. I'm like, I loved it. Loved it there. It's a good way, like in terms of thinking about language, thinking about it from an indigenous point of view, as opposed to coming at it from like linguistics. So I think it gives a different kind of depth to what you're doing. So UC Davis is a really good school. Hey. That's the plug I'm giving for you, Justin.
Thanks. I'll pay you Tuesday.
Oh gosh. All right, so we have some good words of wisdom and encouragement from James and a plug for UC Davis. And I think that's a good way to end our call today. So let's give James another round of emojis and congratulations and show him some appreciation. James, I just want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your experience and your stories. I especially love the story about how you met Shirley. It was funny and brought up some memories of my own as well from when I worked with her, although I didn't work with her as long as you did, but she was like an auntie at the time when I really needed some guidance, figuring out what to do with an anthropology degree and how to combine it with the study of my own language. So I really appreciate hearing that. And I think it was a wonderful presentation. I feel that others learned from your experience and learned a little bit more about the Shasta language. So I want to thank you for your time today. We appreciate you. And I would like to let everybody know that our next presentation is Thursday, October 21st, same time at noon, and we will feature Karina Luna Giri speaking about how to protect your language in language revitalization. So we hope to see you at that talk as well. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Yotwa.
Manahuba, thank you, everyone.